Hello and welcome. My name is Shane Walls and I make my living as a fine art nature photographer who truly depends on his tool watches when I'm out in the field, whether it be timing my hikes or timing my exposures. And watches have become an intricate tool in my photography process. Through my travels as a nature photographer, I've put my personal watches through some pretty hospitable situations. Whether it be snow camping for 3 weeks in the Eastern Sierras, spending a week out in Death Valley with temperatures reaching over 120 degrees, being alone while exploring an underdeveloped country, sheltering in caves, spending weeks in humid, lush, dark, thick jungles, or just being on the road for months at a time. I put my watches through a lot, and through those experiences and these videos I put out, I keep getting the question, with my personal experience and all the watches out there, which watch would I recommend for the apocalypse? Let's jump into it. So there's two trains of thought for the apocalypse. Well, three, I guess, but we'll touch on the zombie apocalypse at the end of this video. There's kind of the apocalypse, let's use Hollywood here, kind of the Book of Eli idea for the apocalypse, which is where during a future war we destroyed our atmosphere and now the earth is just so hot, it's an apocalypse, it's hard to live. Or there's a flip side of that, kind of a day after tomorrow thing, where it's nuclear winter or freezing cold. You know, either an asteroid hits, nuclear bomb goes off, plunging us into nuclear winter. Now for this exercise, I'm gonna lean a little bit more on the extreme cold apocalypse, just because, you know, majority of our scientists agree we've already kind of had a nuclear winter apocalypse on this planet, which again, most scientists agree Ice Age apocalypse, extreme cold apocalypse is what killed the dinosaurs. For this video, I'm gonna lean a little bit more on that because it already has happened on Earth. First off, why would it be important to be able to tell time and have a watch in a future apocalypse? Me personally, I think it'd be a huge advantage, allowing you to keep track of calendar dates. If there is still a possibility of having a growing season, knowing how long until winter, for example, or knowing wild game migration times, or being able to conduct time-sensitive movements. You don't have to depend on the wide variant of let's meet at dawn, making you much more efficient in day-to-day life, in your travels, and I'm sad to say, but it's also helpful planning aggressions against your enemies.
What happens if the fire goes out?
We'll go across the street to Pottery Barn and steal their fire.
We could use my new invention, a pointy rock tied to a stick.
What most people think of the apocalypse, the perfect watch for the apocalypse, so many people consider the G-shock the perfect answer. And for this video, we're gonna talk about the Mudmaster, kind of G-shock's higher end, quote unquote, toughest watch they make. You know, GPS, has all these other functions, and yeah, you would think would be a great fit and a great help for the apocalypse. Maybe kind of the Book of Eli type of apocalypse, where it's really hot, even though the strap might not last forever. But since we are leaning more towards a nuclear winter, I'm actually discounting pretty much all the quartz and digital watches just because of their huge problem. At the heart of all of them is an inexpensive battery. And we know how unreliable batteries are in cold weather. From my personal experiences, I've broken 3 G-shocks while snow camping, whether it be a flat battery or the plastic getting brittle due to the cold temperatures. The cold just drains the battery, and that's the huge problem with, again, digital and quartz movements, batteries. Batteries hate cold weather. And that solar charging that comes on the G-shock isn't really going to help you too much when it's under a big thick jacket and when you already have a flat battery. Which is a huge bummer actually, because digital and quartz watches keep better time as well as offer a lot of other functions, which would be very useful in apocalypse. Well, at least for a little bit. Something I learned while researching this video, when you put a satellite up into space, I just assumed you shot it up, you start orbiting, bing, bang, boom, you're done. Researching it, there's a lot of effort and work that goes into keeping those satellites up in orbit, or at least on the correct orbit. If there's no one to adjust their orbits with little engine bursts to correct for the fluctuating gravity pulls from the moon and the Earth, they would be sent off course, rendering them useless. And from what I understand, satellites lose their orbit pretty quickly if there's no one to control them, which then again renders the satellite useless, which therefore GPS and functions like that would be rendered useless soon after the apocalypse. But, all that being said, I would, knowing the apocalypse was coming, I would grab a G-shock and use it for as long as I could before, the satellites, the battery, or whatever have you dies off. Moving into automatic mechanical watches. Now these watches just charge by the motion on your wrist. They have a little plate, I'm sorry, it's not technically correct, but they have a plate that spins which charges the watch. Now, like I mentioned, mechanical watches aren't as accurate as its quartz or digital counterpart, so they're going to need some fine-tuning throughout the apocalypse, so to speak. Now, the more accurate your watch is, the less fine-tuning you'll need to do, but a way to get around this is you can go after this video, go online, there's a ton of websites. You can print out a chart that shows for the next 100 years the exact time sunrise and sunset is in locations all over the world. Print that out, keep it on you, and every couple of years, I guess, set your watch. For example, me being kind of a watch nerd, I know my Rolex Explorer 2 here is just about a second fast over 24 hours. And the more I wear it with mechanical watches, the more you wear it, the more accurate they are. So apocalypse, I'm assuming the watch will never leave your wrist. So this Explorer 2, for the example, is about a second fast over 24 hours. So take that, I know there's gonna be some fluctuation throughout that. At the end of the year, this watch will be, let's just say, roughly about 6 minutes to 10 minutes fast over the year. So knowing that, I would just make, fine adjustments throughout the year, and maybe, every 2 or 3 years, bring out my paperwork and fine tune it exactly to the rise or set of the sun to get accurate time and maintain that for as long as I live. Here are the qualifications I'm going to use to pick the watches, and was very surprised looking at thousands of watches. There are very few watches that meet all these qualifications. For the initial nuclear blast or EMT blast, the watch is going to need to be anti-magnetic protection over 10,000 Gauss. At minimum, the water resistance is going to need to be 100 meters. Because remember, water resistant math, watch math, it isn't exactly clear cut as depth. And you don't want to break your watch when you're just trying to take a bath. Of course, it's got to be very tough, durable, and have shock protection technology built into the movement. It's going to need to have superior precision and accuracy, either COSC or META certified, or something similar in their field. And I'm looking for a simpler, less refined movement, well built. It doesn't need to look pretty, it doesn't need to have the case back on it, just something simple, maybe just the time and date. Less moving parts, less chance of something going wrong. The watch will need to be available with a metal bracelet option. They might not be as comfortable as a strap or leather, but they'll last a lot longer. It needs to be a low maintenance, long lasting movement. I think this is really overlooked in a lot of things, especially doing this research and reading other blogs about this. It's very overlooked. Toughness isn't just about, going out beating up the watch. It's about beating up that watch day in, day out, week in, week out, month out, year out, decades. Needs to have great lume, and put a pin in this one. The watch will need to come from a well-known, established, proven brand. With that criteria, we're losing a lot of watches, and we're kind of setting the base price point for a watch that has all this criteria right between, again, base price would probably be about $3,000 to $4,000 to get a watch brand new with all these qualifications. Now, that sounds kind of steep. We're talking apocalypse here, so you have to spend. It's gonna be kind of an investment to last a long time. And I know this cancels out, a lot of the Seikos, Victorinox, Citizen watches, all great watches with good purposes, and I've owned a lot of them. Really fun, cool watches. But facing the facts, if you're constantly wearing those types of watches in kind of rougher environments day in, day out, they do start losing accuracy after 2 or 3 years, which isn't ideal for the apocalypse. Watches that might still be considered at a lesser price point and are really about 80% of the way there to being that perfect apocalypse watch is the Tudor Ranger. That's a very good, inexpensive watch. Tough, cost certified, great overall watch. Longines has some great watches too that are very accurate, tough, that kind of can be added into the lesser expensive but well-made, probably long-lasting watches. As well as the Zen UX and Doxa Sub 300. All killer watches. Now taking a step back, if you were to come up a couple weeks ago before I started doing the research for this video and ask me, which watch right now would I take for the apocalypse? I would answer immediately the IWC, one of their perpetual calendars. They're well made, good, tough, accurate movements, and they have all the information I would ever need. Time, date, day, month, moon phases, and the really cool thing, it's mechanically programmed for 577 years. I wouldn't have to keep track of which months had 30 days, which had 31s, leap years, nothing. I thought it would be the perfect watch. However, after weeks of research, I have changed my mind due to the fact that it is such a complex, fragile, well-refined movement. It would need, especially if you're wearing it all the time, servicing every 4 to 6 years. Now, I'm going to touch base on that a little bit more in depth about automatic watches with all the moving parts. You do need to service them. But first off, let's name what I think would be the best watches for an apocalypse, watches that you could go out and buy today. The Tudor Black Bay and Pelagos. The Breitling Avenger. The JLC Polaris Mariner, Omega Seamaster 300 and Planet Ocean, the Rolex Submariner Date and Sea Dweller, and Blancpain 50 Fathoms. Now I know you're thinking there are other watches out there that met all the criteria I mentioned earlier, but again, I'm going back to the simpler the better. So I left off GMTs, chronographs, and also my personal taste kind of came into it. I don't like big, huge, chunky watches, so I left those off as well. Also, you don't see any Grand Seiko watches on my final list just because their spring drive uses a quartz oscillator is what they call it, which means electronics. I don't think that would work very well in nuclear winter. Not 100% sure, but I wouldn't trust it 100%, so that's another reason why I left those off too. Again, great watches, but wouldn't trust them in nuclear winter. Now, I'm sure some of you are already in the comment section saying, oh, I missed this watch, or what about this watch? And please, if you think I did miss something, put it down in the comment section and I'll explain why I didn't pick that watch, or I might have just missed one. It seems diving watches are the way to go. They're just sturdy, well-built, simply designed watches with only the essentials. Now, before I pick which watch I think would be ideal for the apocalypse, we got to take a step back and talk about kind of the Achilles heel of really all watches actually, but more kind of the mechanical watches. Since they are mechanical, they have a lot of moving parts and they do need service. Now, there's nothing really set in stone in the way of a timeline for this. My Rolex AD recommends I get my Rolex serviced every 10 years, but also says it's not needed if the watch is keeping accurate time. My good friend's uncle has had a Rolex Submariner now for over 30 years, has never had it serviced, it's keeping accurate time. However, that watch was part of a rotating collection. Now, to get down to it and really set a timeline for the apocalypse and watch service, I'm going to overlap a life in the apocalyptic world with the day-to-day activities of a Navy SEAL on deployment. I watched this great video over on Watchfinders where they interviewed a retired American Navy SEAL who wore his Rolex Sea Dweller as his everyday watch throughout his deployment as a Navy SEAL. That watch lasted him 12 years before it needed to be serviced. So I'm going to use that 12 years as kind of the benchmark for when a well-made mechanical movement will need to be serviced. Because I think a Navy SEAL apocalyptic world, they'll have some overlap on a day-to-day, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So even the toughest, most durable watch only has a lifespan of about 12 years. That's a problem if you're hoping to survive longer than that. So now looking into it, maybe there's not quite the ideal watch for the apocalypse. There are other options. There is the option that you take an online or take a course to learn simple watchmaking, back to having, simpler movements. You can then, I guess, fix your watch, hopefully, which I'll talk about here a little bit more in a second. But really, almost even a better option is having multiple watches to help distribute the wear and tear. On that note, I want to transition back to what I talked about earlier in my qualifications, that it needs to be a well-known watch brand. Rolex is the biggest in-house watchmaker in the world and outsells second place Omega by nearly 3-1. And due to Rolex's simpler, not overly elaborate, well-made movements, a lot of their parts are interchangeable, making for an abundance of parts that can be found around the world. Omega and Tudor have big market shares as well, but nowhere near Rolex, even though Tudor is owned by Rolex. Counting all the places in the world that carry authentic replacement parts for Rolex, not even counting knockoff parts, Rolex has well over double the locations around the world as Omega. Now, I'm not saying all these repair location or ADs will have the part you need, but it does give you a lot better chance. And in an apocalyptic world, I'm assuming when the looters came through, they just took the watches and left the replacement parts untouched. In conclusion, if I had a crystal ball and it was going to warn me about a month or so before the apocalypse hit, I would spend that time, stocking my remote cabin in the woods with canned food, water, weapons, all kinds of supplies. I would take the time to take an online watch repair course, as well as max out my credit card and buy 4 Rolex Submariners. And that would be my choice for the ideal apocalyptic watch. They're tough, well-made, they're 100% proven. And if you had 4 of them, that would just spread out the wear and tear. And that should, at my age, I think that would last me throughout my survival. Hopefully. You never know. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Tell me down below in the comments, you agree, you disagree, you wildly disagree, which I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of those. But this was a fun exercise. I had fun. It sounds a little morbid, but no, I did have fun researching and just really learning how tough watches are and how tough some of the ones you thought that were tough aren't. And just, again, this is all just a fun exercise. Hopefully I really never have to deal with this. Again, just a fun exercise. But thank you again for watching. I really do appreciate it. Give us a like, hit subscribe. We got some more, not so much apocalyptic videos coming up, thank goodness. But we got some travels to Yosemite Valley. We got some more stuff on my Rolex watches. So some fun stuff to come. Thank you again. Cheers. Oh, and I almost forgot. The zombie apocalypse. Now, in that scenario, I would go out and take out a huge loan to purchase my Grail watch, because I am pretty much kissing my butt goodbye. And maybe the thought that, that my Grail watch will be with me forever and it's kind of the last thing I see on this earth might be a little bit soothing. and I'll be spending the rest of my time on Earth with what I think is the coolest watch of all time. Cheers.